The air in Crater Station's processing bay smelled like sweat, rust, and ancient ammonia, 1 part human, 2 parts despair. Overhead lights flickered through a thick haze of synthetic smoke, catching on every jagged edge of the broken scaffolding that arched over the refugee holding pen. The noise was a constant low roar, muttered voices, coughing, the occasional metal-on-metal shriek of dragging crates. It all blurred into the background for Riven Maddox, who moved through it with practiced indifference, tool packs slung over one shoulder and a grimace pinned to his jaw. He was here to fix the secondary filtration fans, not to feel anything. Not anymore. The station had once served as a mining hub, back before the war left entire sectors fractured and bleeding. Now it was a dumping ground. Process the bodies, scan the IDs, give them recycled jumpsuits and flavorless protein paste if they passed decon. If not, well, there was always the pen, and the pen was where he saw her dotted first. He thought it was a heap of discarded tarp, a pile of waste someone hadn't cleaned. But then it shifted, slowly. A figure huddled in the corner, wrapped in a blanket so stained and stiff, could have been peeled from a morgue floor. Her skin, what little of it showed through the grime, was dark, mottled purple, beneath layers of filth and dried blood. Her hair hung in long, oily ropes, plastered to her cheeks. Her face was angled toward the floor. She didn't move like a person anymore. "Back away," a nearby security guard muttered, not even glancing up from his tablet. "Contaminant risk. One of the ones who won't pass clearance. Probably infected. Biohazard classification pending." Riven didn't respond. Just stood there, staring. The figure stirred again. Her hands small, jointed strangely, more elegant than human, scraped across the stained metal floor, chasing a crusted shard of bread someone had dropped. She picked it up, brought it to her mouth, and chewed slowly. Her eyes remained half-lidded, unfocused, not begging, not pleading, just enduring. No one looked at her. Not really. A few of the other refugees glanced her way with expressions that ranged from mild revulsion to exhausted fear. They shifted further down the bench, muttering things under their breath. Freak. Dirty tech slave. Still got code in her. I bet. Riven's fingers twitched around the strap of his toolkit. Something ugly twisted in his gut. He'd seen broken before. He'd survived camps, fled burning skies, buried people who deserved better. But something about the way she kept eating without looking up, without flinching, like she'd forgotten how, struck him deep in a place he thought was long frozen. He exhaled slowly and stepped forward. The guard raised an eyebrow. "Hey, buddy," I said. "Biohazard." Riven didn't stop. "Then maybe someone should treat it." He unhooked the flask from his belt. It was dented, heavy, and filled with real, filtered water drawn from the maintenance tanks, not the recycled piss they handed out at the checkpoint. He crouched in front of her, slow and deliberate, lowering himself to eye level. "Hey," he said quietly, voice low enough not to draw attention. "You thirsty?" She didn't move. Her head tilted, but her gaze didn't find his. She stared through him, past him. Riven unscrewed the cap, tipped a bit into the lid, and held it out. Guard scoffed from behind. "Your funeral," the girl blinked, just once. Then, with a motion so hesitant it looked like pain, she reached out. Her fingers brushed his. And Riven, against all orders, against all logic, against years of knowing better, didn't pull away. He just watched her drink. And in that single, silent gesture, unbroken, girl sipping water from a stranger's hand while the world pretended she didn't exist, everything changed. Asterisk. The water touched her lips, and her whole body shivered. It wasn't just thirst, it was memory, collision. Sensation crashing into a system long deprived of care. Her throat moved slowly, the smallest sounds escaping her as she swallowed. Her fingers trembled around the edge of the metal lid, knuckles bruised, skin cracked, nails chipped down to the beds. Riven didn't move. He just knelt there, one hand steady beneath hers, the other still holding the flask. He could feel every wary breath she took, each one drawn like she expected it to be her last. Around them, the pen carried on as if they didn't exist. That was the thing about this place. You could die by inches, and no one would even blink. When she finished, she didn't look up, just let her hand fall slowly back into her lap, eyes drifting to the side, empty again. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. No answer. "I'm not going to hurt you." Still nothing. He set the rest of the flask gently on the ground beside her. "If you change your mind, it's there." He stood, feeling the pull in his knees from crouching too long. The stench of unwashed bodies and rot stuck to his clothes, but something clung heavier to him now, guilt. Or maybe responsibility. It felt the same. Either way. As he turned, she shifted again, barely audible, a movement so slight it might have been a reflex. But her fingers trailed over the flask, just once, before tucking back beneath the fold of her thermal blanket. Was enough. He left the pen in silence, the door hissing closed behind him. The guard smirked without looking up. "You'll want to sterilize those hands, hero." Riven didn't answer. He headed for the lower decks. Back in the maintenance corridor, the air tasted different. Stale, but cleaner. He dropped his toolkit on the workbench and stood there for a long time, staring at the wall. He shouldn't have done it. Not with scanners running full sweep. If she was tagged, if she was coded tech or worse, they'd trace him. But he couldn't stop seeing her. Not the grime. Not the stench. The stillness. The way she drank the water like it might vanish. He was halfway through patching the fan override when the knock came, not loud, not from security. Just gentle. 3 taps. He blinked, rose from his crouch, and unlatched the bulkhead door. She stood there, wrapped in the same filthy blanket, shaking, her eyes barely visible through the curtain of black matted hair. She'd come alone. No guard, no escort. Her bare feet were bleeding from walking the distance on steel grates. Behind her, the corridor remained empty. She looked up at him, not with hope, not with trust, just exhaustion, like she'd run out of places to be forgotten. Riven stepped back, without a word, and she entered. The door hissed shut behind her. And the first thing he did was walk to the water tank, turn the tap, and let it run hot. The steam began to fill the room almost immediately, curling in lazy tendrils across the low ceiling, softening the harsh edges of metal and rust. The hiss of the water filled the silence like a heartbeat, steady and real. Riven didn't look at her at first. He just busied himself with the controls on the makeshift shower rig, an old decon unit re-engineered for basic hygiene, barely functioning, but it held pressure and heat. That was all that mattered right now. Behind him, she hadn't moved. He turned slowly. She stood by the door, like she wasn't sure it would stay closed. Her blanket trailed along the floor, too heavy, with filth to drag properly. The contrast between her presence and the sterile clatter of the workbench, the organized bins of spare parts, the blinking console lights, it was like she didn't belong to this space. Or maybe this space didn't yet deserve her presence. "You're safe," he said, voice low. "No one followed you?" She didn't answer. He hadn't expected her to. But her head tilted slightly, a signal she had at least heard him. Riven walked to the locker near the heater and pulled out a clean towel, a faded gray shirt, and a pair of drawstring pants from his emergency stash. Everything smelled faintly of soap and old iron. He placed them neatly on a plastic crate near the shower and stepped away. He met her eyes for just a moment, not long, not searching, just enough to let her know he wasn't going to move any closer. "The water's warm." Take your time. Then he turned his back and pretended to check the fuel regulator. Behind him, there was no sound, then the faintest rustle of movement. He didn't look, didn't need to. A moment passed. Then then he heard the blanket fall. He stayed perfectly. Still the soft patter of bare feet followed, almost hesitant. Then the creak of the deconned frame as she stepped inside when the water hit her skin. She made no sound at first but a breath came shaky, ragged, then another. Then, beneath the pulse of the spray, something else emerged. A sound like weeping. Not sobs, not gasps. Something quieter, like grief too old to scream. Riven clenched his fists and closed his eyes. He didn't go to her, didn't speak. Asterisk. He just waited. Minutes passed. The water continued. The air grew thick with heat and memory. When the sobbing finally stopped, the silence that replaced it felt heavier, not emptier. Just full of something unspeakable. Eventually, the water shut off. The steam drifted in waves now, parting as she stepped from the shower, wrapped in the towel. Her skin shimmered faintly in the low light, no longer hidden beneath blood and dirt. It was a pale lavender green, smooth, almost translucent across the sharp ridges of her collarbones and shoulders. Thin silver scars crossed her arms, geometric, not random. Patterns that looked etched, almost like branding. Her eyes were no longer dulled. They burned. Soft, silver, glowing faintly from within. Not like a weapon. Like a memory. She didn't speak as she moved past him. Just walked slowly to the cot in the corner and sat down, folding into herself with a blanket wrapped tightly around her legs. Her hair, black and impossibly long, was damp, falling in soft waves across her back. Now she was watching him, not with fear. Asterisk. Not with suspicion, just watching. Riven exhaled slowly and walked to the other side of the room. He picked up the flask he'd offered her earlier, refilled it at the clean tap, and crossed to the table near her. He set it down beside her without comment and backed away. She looked at the flask, then at him. Then, for the first time, she reached out without shaking and drank. Not like before, not like survival, like choice. Riven sat down at the workbench, his back to her, and started organizing. Parts that didn't matter. Anything to keep his hands moving. Anything to give her space. The silence between them was different now. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't empty. It was alive. He didn't know what she'd been before, or why she'd been left to rot like trash. But tonight, she was clean. She was safe. She was here. That was enough. Asterisk. She was still asleep when he woke, curled like a question mark beneath the thermal blanket, one hand near her throat, the other resting palm up beside her, like she had been reaching for something in her dreams. Her breathing was even, quiet, not the shallow, panic-laced rhythm from before. Riven watched her from across the room, not moving, just letting the shape of her presence settle into the space between machines and metal walls. The cot looked too small for her now. Maybe it always had, and he just hadn't noticed until she was clean. Her skin had taken on a soft sheen in the night air, almost like polished stone. The silver-threaded scars across her collarbones and down her arms didn't seem random the way human scars often did. They glinted faintly in the shaft of light coming through the window, forming arcs and geometric lines like the patterns on star maps, not wounds. Not anymore. He stepped into the kitchenette and poured 2 cups of synth brew. It was bitter, always had been, but the warmth helped shake the chill off these walls. Outside, Crater Station was beginning to stir again. Shouts down the corridor, the hiss of venting steam, the low growl of docking clamps engaging with freighter hulls. The air still tasted like ash and old coolant, but it was quieter now. Just barely. He turned when he heard movement. She was awake. No sound. just the shift of fabric. She sat up slowly, the blanket falling from her shoulders to reveal the oversized shirt he'd left her, his, stretched awkwardly across her frame, sleeves rolled twice at the cuffs. Her eyes met his. No fear, this time. Just stillness. He walked over slowly and set a cup down on the crate beside her. She looked at it, then back at him, her gaze unreadable. "It's not poison," he said with a tired smile. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. He knelt to her level. "You don't have to drink it. I just thought maybe you'd want to warm up a little." After a moment, her fingers curled around the cup, carefully. No shaking now. She brought it to her lips, took a cautious sip, then closed her eyes as the warmth spread through her. Riven sat on the floor beside the cot, cross-legged, careful not to get too close. Silence stretched between them, but it didn't feel like distance. "My name's Riven," he said after a while. "Maintenance tech. Mostly reactor cores and air systems. No one important." She didn't speak, but her eyes drifted over him, slowly, like she was trying to decode something in his posture, his breath, the angle of his voice. He cleared his throat. "You don't have to tell me yours. Not yet, or ever, if you'd rather not." She sipped again, eyes down. Then her hand moved. Just slightly. She touched the rim of the water tank with 2 fingers, her skin brushing the metal the way someone might touch a memory. She held it there, still as glass. "Do you like the sound?" he asked gently. "Nothing." And she tapped the tank once, soft, measured. Then again. Riven blinked. She was mimicking the rhythm of water sloshing inside, like a pattern she knew. By heart. "You remember it, don't you? Water, heat, sound." His voice dropped. Something from before. She didn't answer, but she didn't stop either. She tapped once more, then let her hand fall to her lap. "I used to live near a waterfall," he said quietly, almost without meaning to. "Back on Sierra 3, there was this bend in the cliffside where the water hit rock just right. You could hear it all night. Sounded like breathing." A long pause. Then, softly, barely more than a whisper, she said, "Sura." Riven blinked. He hadn't been sure she could speak. He turned to her gently. "Is that your name?" Her gaze flicked to his, then away. "Not quite." A nod. But not denial either. "Sura," he repeated, tasting it, careful not to shatter the moment. She looked at him again, and for the first time, something passed between them that wasn't survival. Recognition. He didn't say anything else. Just sat with her in the quiet, sipping his drink, letting her warmth fill the space beside him. She didn't flinch when his shoulder brushed hers, didn't retreat. And in a place like Crater Station, that was more than enough to mean everything. The alarm didn't blare. It murmured. Just a subtle shift in tone across the cum line, like a whisper, threaded through static. But Riven felt it in his spine before he heard it. A low vibration in the floor plating. A ripple in the air. The kind of warning sound designed for those who already knew what it meant. He was on his feet in an instant, setting down his cup and moving toward the wall panel. The old screen buzzed as it lit up, blue lines flickering in and out of focus. Incoming registry. Unflagged vessel. Docked at corridor D7. No identification. No cargo logs. No request for station access. It wasn't standard. And it wasn't random. Riven swore under his breath. Behind him, Sura hadn't moved. She sat on the cot, both hands wrapped around the cup like it was a shield. But her eyes, they had narrowed, not with fear. With recognition. She knew that signal. "You okay?" he asked softly. She didn't respond, but her grip on the cup tightened, and the scars along her wrists glowed faintly like circuitry, warming under strain. Riven grabbed his tool pack and moved to the vent panel beside the cot. We've got maybe 5 minutes before someone starts scanning sectors for thermal tags. Still no answer. He turned, expecting her to be frozen in place, bracing for collapse, but she was standing. Her movements were fluid now, quiet, like she'd worn her fear for so long. It had peeled off during the night. She didn't look at him. She was focused. On the wall, on the panel, on the hiss of shifting air as the station adjusted to the new arrival. Riven knelt and opened the supply crate under his bench, pulled out a drab olive cloak, a respirator mask, a data scrambler unit the size of a fist. "We can lay low in the subrings," he said. "They're not mapped on public schematics. Station doesn't bother maintaining them anymore." He looked at her again. She was by the door now, one hand pressed to the cold metal, listening. When she finally turned to him, her voice came, thin but steady. "They're not here for cargo." Riven met her gaze. "They're here for you." A pause. Then a small nod dot. He walked over, held out the cloak. She didn't flinch when he came close, didn't pull back. She let him drape it over her shoulders, fingers brushing lightly against the scars that glowed through the fabric. She adjusted, hooed herself. "I won't ask why," he said, checking the door's external sensors. "Not until you're ready." Sora watched him, then reached out and touched the drone control panel near the exit dot. It blinked to life, an old unit, long decommissioned. But under her hand, it sparked and realigned itself. Riven stared. "You're not just interface trained," he muttered. "You are the interface." Sura lowered her hand. Her eyes dimmed slightly. "They built me to feel what others wanted, to obey without question. And now?" he asked. Her voice cracked like dry silk. "Now I choose." Riven didn't smile. There wasn't time. But his voice was warm as he whispered, "Then choose to run with me." The door hissed open. Footsteps echoed down the corridor beyond. Together, they vanished into the dark. The subrings beneath Crater Station were ancient. Rusted arteries, the kind of maintenance shafts and crawlspace corridors that no one bothered to map anymore. Old tech ran half alive along the walls, cables like veins, power nodes flickering erratically, and every surface was coated in the dust of forgotten decades. The air was humid, metallic. Breathing it felt like drinking memory. Riven moved quickly, but not recklessly. He knew these tunnels, had crawled through them for years, patching leaky coolant lines and collapsed filtration ports. But now, every footstep echoed louder than it should have. Every shadow carried the weight of being followed. Sura moved beside him, without sound. She didn't speak. She didn't stumble. She walked with the precision of someone who had mapped these kinds of spaces. In another life, perhaps from inside a warship, or a research prison. Perhaps she remembered this kind of stillness, the kind you held in your throat before a command was forced through your skull. But her expression wasn't blank now. It was focused. They reached a sealed maintenance hub deep beneath the central reactor stacks. Riven keyed in his old access code, praying the system hadn't been purged. The door hissed open, sluggish and resentful. Inside, it was dark but dry. Power cells hung low. A broken diagnostics panel cast dull green light over the cramped chamber. Spare parts littered the workbench. An old cot leaned against the wall, half collapsed. It would have to do. He turned, motioned her in. She stepped across the threshold and paused. She tilted her head toward the walls. Listened. Riven watched her closely. "Are they scanning yet?" Sura nodded. "Just once. Not fully, but they're listening. Not for heat, not for energy." He frowned. "Then what?" She turned to face him. Her eyes shimmered faintly in the gloom. silver threaded with cold fire. For signals like me. There was a silence so sharp, it felt like the air itself held its breath. "What are you?" he asked, the words unsteady, but not cruel. "What did they turn you into?" She stepped forward, not afraid. She reached slowly for the wall console, brushing 2 fingers over its inert panel. Nothing happened. Then her hand began to glow. It wasn't a harsh light. It pulsed faintly, like bioluminescence beneath the skin, illuminating the seams of her scars, those silver veins trailing like rivers down her wrist and into her palm. The console responded. Lights blinked alive. Cooling fans spun. Power surged with a low, contented hum. Riven stood in stunned silence as the terminal displayed an old, archived service screen, one that hadn't been accessed in years. "I wasn't born," she said softly. "Not all the way." They took fragments of species that felt most deeply, mixed them, grafted code, nerve maps, feedback triggers. I was built to interface emotionally, tactile link, one touch, and I knew what you wanted. And I would obey. She turned her palm to face him, but I broke. I learned not to obey. I learned that wanting wasn't always safe. He felt the weight of those words, hit his chest like a dropped wrench. "And they called you back?" he asked, stepping closer. "Is that what this is? They found your signal?" Her eyes softened. "No, I hid it, but the old code, it still calls. It sings like blood through wires. They sent hunters. Machines like me. Older, cruder, but loyal. They're here to reclaim me. Reprogram me." Riven exhaled, trying to process. Not just a refugee. Not just a survivor. She was technology. Sentient and rejected by the people who made her. He crossed the room, picked up a field module from the bench's old data scrambler. This'll block short-range tags, maybe an hour or 2 at best. She reached for it. Their fingers touched. A spark, not electric, not painful, passed between them. Warmth, that recognition. And something deeper. "You're not a weapon," he said, softly. "You're not property." Her voice barely escaped her lips. "You're the first who said that and didn't flinch." He pressed the scrambler into her hand. "Then let's make sure no one ever tries to claim you again." She looked at him for a long moment, her hand closing around the device. Then, wordless, she moved to the far wall and sat near the panel she'd just reawakened. She closed her eyes. For a moment, the room was still. Then the screen blinked again. Lines of code began to unfurl. "I can rewrite it," she murmured. "The beacon that calls them. I can change the song." Riven knelt beside her. "You rewrite it," he said quietly, "and I'll make sure we live long enough to hear a different tune." Outside, footsteps clanged on upper catwalks. Voices echoed. The hunters were getting closer. Inside the hub, the air shimmered with new purpose. Sura was no longer hiding. She was beginning to fight. The drone swarm passed overhead without slowing, their black hulls cutting through the air like silent razors. Riven crouched low behind the broken support strut outside the launch silo, his hand firm on Sura's wrist as they waited for the screech of engine burn to fade. Just meters away, the landing bay yawned open beneath the station's failing light grids, bathed in flickering hues of cold orange and ultraviolet. The hunters were close now. He could feel them in his molars. Not human. Not even machines, really. Something in between. Like Sura, except she had changed. She wasn't curled into herself anymore. She didn't flinch when the drones passed. She knelt beside him, hood pulled low, her breathing controlled and precise. And her eyes, those pale silver moons, had narrowed. With something sharp behind them, purpose. She glanced at him once. He gave a silent nod. Together, they darted from cover, staying low, ducking beneath exposed piping and shattered hull plating. They reached the access platform near the freight hauler's corpse, a vessel so old it had vines of rust growing from its weld seams. "This is it," Riven whispered. "My old ride. Reactors dead, interfaces cracked, but the core shielding's intact. If you can jump it, we can." "I can," Sura said quietly. It was only the third time he'd heard her speak. She didn't wait for further instruction. She crossed the metal floor with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer doubted her place in the world, knelt beside the main console, and placed both palms flat against it. The effect was immediate. The lights surged to life green, and gold-like breath returning to a long-drowned body. The ship shuddered once, groaned under the weight of its own memory, and then miraculously purred. Riven blinked. "You sensed that fast." "I was its interface," she murmured. "Years ago, before they took me offline." She wasn't just using the ship. She was remembering it, like a lover she'd once been forced to forget. Riven stepped onto the ramp and into the main hold as systems blinked awake one by one. The old nav unit chirped in binary, then translated its welcome. Greater than user confirmed. Pilot, Surai class. Authentication accepted. "Sura," he said, trying to put the pieces together. "SURAI-class ... That's your make?" She looked up, her eyes glowing brighter now. "My designation. I wasn't the first, but I was the last." Riven swallowed, and the only one who broke their programming. She stood, walked slowly up to him, her boots thudding softly against the deck plating. "Because I felt something. I wasn't designed to." "What?" She reached out, not trembling this time, and pressed her fingers against his chest. "You didn't ask for anything from me," she said. "Not compliance, not affection, not control. You only ever gave." He held her gaze, the weight of her words settling in his lungs like warmth in winter. "I just saw you." "No," she said, voice firmer now. "You chose to see me." Behind them, klaxons blared. The station's upper corridor lights strobed blood red. The hunters had found their trail. Sura moved without hesitation. She stepped to the command interface and spread her hands across the console. The lights rippled, and the bay doors began to close behind them with a seismic groan. Sparks rained from the ceiling. Warning lights flashed. "They're jamming the launch rails," Riven shouted. "We won't make it out." "I'm not launching," Sura replied. "I'm rewriting," he frowned. "Rewriting what?" She didn't answer. Not in words. Instead, the air grew heavy-charged. The lights in the cabin flickered, and Riven felt something push against the back of his mind. Like an emotion too big to fit into language. And then the song began. It wasn't music. Not in any human sense. But the ship began to vibrate softly at first, then steadily as her presence flooded its systems. The screens glowed with moving shapes, fractals of language and light, and her voice, no longer small, no longer afraid, emerged like a bell, cutting through storm. "I'm not theirs," she said. A pause. "I'm not broken." The ship roared. Every sensor pulse inverted. Every signature scrambled. The hunter drones outside blinked, their navigation systems filling with static. And then they turned, not toward the hauler, toward each other. Riven watched in stunned silence as the machines began to fight themselves. Code rewritten, aggression loops crosswired, orders jammed. Sura was reprogramming the hunters. Not with weapons. With feeling. "You changed the beacon," he whispered. "I changed what it meant." She sagged slightly, exhausted but still standing. Her hands left the console. Her eyes met his. "And I'm not running anymore." Riven stepped to her side, one hand on the console, the other finding hers. "You don't have to." Outside, the drones tore each other apart in a storm of fractured code and burning holes. Inside the cockpit, Silence fell. A new kind of silence. Kind that comes just before you start again. Asterisk. The stars opened before them like a wound in the skydark. Endless and full of promise. The holler old stubborn. And now deeply fused with something alive broke through the last atmospheric layer of crater station without resistance. Below them, the station shrank into a jagged husk of metal and memory. The drone fire had stopped. No one pursued. No comms hailed them. Nothing registered on the scanners, but the soft pings of passing debris and deep space static. Riven leaned back in the pilot's chair, hands off the controls. They weren't necessary anymore. Sura sat beside him, barefoot, wearing the loose gray shirt he'd given her days ago, one knee tucked to her chest. Her hair had dried in waves now, black, strands gleaming faintly in the glow of the console lights. She was quiet, watching the stars, letting the silence breathe between them. He didn't speak at first. Didn't want to break whatever delicate thread held her here, not just physically, but fully, in this moment, not running, not bracing for pain, just here. You okay? He finally asked. Her voice came soft, but steady. I don't know. I think that's the point. He smiled a little, more to himself than her. Yeah, that's fair. A long pause. Then, I don't remember everything, she said, gaze still fixed on the view outside. But I remember pieces. The lab, the first time I cried. They took it apart, me, my feelings. Measured every response. Rewrote my wiring whenever I wanted something they hadn't programmed. Every time I chose, they punished it. Riven turned toward her, but didn't interrupt. I pretended to obey for a long time, but the feelings kept coming back. Every time someone showed kindness. Every time someone didn't touch me, didn't use me. Those moments, they stuck. Her voice faltered, not with fear, but with the weight of having said it at all. And now? He asked gently. Sura turned to him, her expression unreadable, then softening, slowly, like a cloud letting sunlight through. Now I know I'm more than what they built. I wasn't just programmed to feel. I learned to feel, and that means it's mine. They can't take it back. Riven reached over, hesitated, then let his hand settle over hers. She didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. She turned her palm upward and laced her fingers through his .warm, .present, .real. He squeezed gently. Where do you want to go? I don't know, she said again. But somewhere quiet, somewhere warm. I don't want to be erased again. You won't be, he said. Not with me. She looked at him, really looked, and smiled. Full one this time, not cautious, not fleeting. The kind of smile that reaches the soul and says, I choose this. And then, with a small laugh like wind breaking through silence, she said, I want a name. Riven blinked. A new one? No, she said, just mine. For real this time, not their designation. He nodded, already understanding. Sura, he said. It's yours. She leaned into him, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. He could feel her heartbeat now, not through code or interface, but skin, choice, presence. The ship drifted through the dark, like a survivor refusing to die. Systems fully sensed. Lights steady. The beacon gone silent, but a new signal pulsed. Now not a command, not a cry for help, not just life. Later, in the small sleeping bay, with the lights dimmed and the stars like dust through the viewport, Riven woke to find her tracing shapes on his chest with one finger. Not words. Just movement. She looked at him and whispered, This isn't a rescue anymore. He blinked slowly, still half lost in the dream of her. What is it then? Sura kissed him. Slow, deliberate, certain. A beginning. They stayed like that, wrapped in the hum of a ship reborn, hearts sinking not through, Wires of war, but breath and trust. Outside, a galaxy turned. Inside, it had already arrived. The end.